Welcome to Jammin' with Jason Mefford, a show where we discuss topics relevant to Chief Audit Executives and professionals in audit, risk, and compliance. We discuss the technical and soft skills needed to navigate the minefields of organizations. You hear best practices and practical advice for helping you advance your career, and we'll even talk about music, mindfulness, and psychology, because we can. So sit back and relax while you listen to the #1 podcast in the world for internal auditors, unscripted and unedited. Well, welcome everybody to another episode of Jammin' with Jason. And today I am excited because I get to speak with a guy who is not only a great guy, but he is legendary in the internal audit profession. But like I said, even more important, he's actually a really nice guy that I've really enjoyed getting to know over the years, and that is Steve Goepfert. So Steve, welcome aboard.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate it. Appreciate the introduction. Sometimes when I get these nice introductions, I kind of feel like I should just thank them and then turn the set off.
No, it's because we both we're on, and we're going to get into this a little bit about but IIA committees, and you were the chairman for a while. And I just remember, too, like even from the first time that I met you, just really got the sense that you're a genuine person. You're a nice guy. And I've just seen that the whole time through. A lot of times you don't get that. And so I just really appreciate that with you. I think we went probably 10 years without seeing each other, and then actually saw each other in person at the conference here in what was it, July? So we got to actually reconnect in person, which was always kind of fun. Now, there may be some people that don't really kind of know your story. And so, one of the things about this, because you were a chief audit executive for quite a while, you're retired now, living the life in Tennessee, I think, right? As we were talking about. But maybe just kind of give a little background, kind of the high level of, how did your career start? How did you end up getting to be chief audit executive? Maybe some of the other things that you did with the IIA as well.
Sure, Jason. Be happy to. Well, I think like so many people in my generation, maybe not so many today, but in my generation, when I came out of school in the mid '70s, I can even remember in my college classes, there was really no discussion of internal auditing as a career path. It was, if you were any kind of a student, and if you were any kind of a good student, then you had to go into, at that time, the big 8 public accounting firms. Otherwise, you were a mutant, or there was something, something in your, in your past that had been discovered, where you had to go into industry and go into something called internal audit. Mm-hmm. And so I went into public, worked in the St. Louis area with as I like to call it, the good firm, the good part of PwC, Coopers and Lybrand, and had a great experience. Worked for 5 years, got to what today you would call the junior manager level, mm-hmm. and had some interesting clients, including a client that was a fraud client. I mean, we literally got them. They dismissed their previous auditors. They dismissed their CEO, and they dismissed their CFO, and were under investigation by the SEC. And in we came, and actually spent the first 3 months just trying to figure out why did this occur, and how bad were the internal controls, and then went through and really rebuilt their balance sheet. Uh-huh. And in fact, you couldn't believe anything. I mean, you couldn't believe any number on the balance sheet. I still remember having an auditor walk up to me and hand me a prepaid insurance account and said, "I can't figure this thing out."
Because it doesn't exist.
Well, it did exist, but the basis of what was in the account had been a doctored document supposedly from an insurance company saying you had an insurance refund of this amount of money. And it was completely unreal. But I mean, it was quite an experience. Probably started my introduction to really understanding what it would be like to be in an internal audit function. Mm-hmm. After spending that time, I joined the airline industry with a small airline by the name of Texas International Airlines in internal audit, and most people probably don't even remember Texas International unless they were from Texas, Oklahoma, or Louisiana. And the only reason it was international is we had some flights into Mexico. And but Texas International ultimately bought Continental Airlines, and so went to work with Continental. Did a few other journeys along the line. Ultimately ended up over in Miami with Eastern Airlines, where in the late '80s, where I got my first head of internal audit role, and was then a chief auditor in the airline industry for over 25 years with Eastern, Continental, and then ultimately my last role as the vice president of internal audit at United Airlines.
Yeah, so you kind of saw throughout your career. I mean, that's one, the airline industry is a great example of kind of that consolidation over time, right? Like you said, Texas International bought Continental. You ended up leaving and going to Eastern. I can't remember who ended up buying Eastern.
It was a parent holding company. We had a parent holding company called Texas Air Corps.
Okay.
And they owned they owned Continental, they owned Eastern, they owned People's Express, they owned New York Air, and they bought Frontier, and ultimately merged them all together, into a consolidated Continental after Eastern went out of business.
Okay, well then Frontier must have gotten spun out later, or did somebody just start using that?
Frontier's had many existences. They've had many lives. There have been many Frontiers.
Okay. Yeah, well, it's kind of interesting because, like you said, I mean, again, here you start off in public accounting, and I know that is kind of the, because I think part of this exercise is helping people kind of understand how people eventually get into a chief audit executive role. And like you said, when you came out of school, even when I came out of school in the 90s, it was still pretty much that pathway, right? I mean, I went to Anderson and KPMG, and then I ended up coming into internal audit. But a lot of people were going into public accounting, then coming in. That's changed a little bit now, right? And so I'm sure, again, towards the end of your career, you saw that we're getting people from lots of different backgrounds, lots of different career paths that end up getting them into internal audit, which I think is actually pretty exciting. I mean, it makes it.
Everybody, as I always tell people, their journey, it's a journey. Your career is a journey, and you're not sure which direction you're going to go through. I mean, I actually left internal audit for a while, headed up the payroll department at Continental Airlines during the first bankruptcy, which I would tell any human being, there's two places you do not want to be during a bankruptcy, and that's payroll and accounts payable, because your life is going to be absolutely miserable. I know more about bankruptcy law than almost anybody other than maybe a bankruptcy attorney, and, because of that. And I spent time out of internal audit in revenue accounting functions, and then in a financial planning group. And then at Eastern, ultimately my CFO came to me one day and called me in his office, and he said, weren't you in an internal audit years ago? And I go, yeah. And he says, well, the head of internal audit's leaving. And I said, I'd like you to take this role. And that's actually how I got back into internal audit, was just through doing other kinds of activities, and then came back into internal audit. But you're absolutely right. Today, so many of my peers, even at the time I retired in 2013, were people who had no financial backgrounds, many of them, coming in from all different disciplines. And as you said, they bring a different type of perspective to the function, and I think can be a very good fit to the role.
Yeah. Well, and I think your experience too, because like you said, right, I mean, you started public accounting, you went into internal audit, then you left internal audit. And I think sometimes people get scared. They're like, they come into internal audit and they think they're going to spend their whole career there. Or if they leave, they're afraid they can never come back. And I don't think that's the case. I mean, it wasn't the case with you. You see that with a lot of people. In fact, when you get up to the CAE rank, most of the time, those people have had some other responsibilities besides just audit. And so, moving out into the business, some departments do like the rotational kind of thing. I don't know if you guys did that at Continental or United, where you'd actually rotate people out into the business. They'd work there for a while and then kind of come back eventually.
For at the staff level, we certainly, and even at my leadership ranks, we would encourage people, if there was opportunities in the organization, to move out. The great news about people moving out in your organization is after they've been out there a while, you can also tap them on the shoulder and say, would you like to come back into internal audit? We had that happen a number of cases with some of my really good people that, because, even my journey, there was a period of time where I was absolutely positively sure I did not want to be in audit. I'd been in public accounting, I'd been in internal auditing, and I wanted to do other things, and I knew I could do other things. And then, but once I got back into internal audit, I realized after a while, man, I really do enjoy being in internal audit. This is what I want to do. And finally found a boss who wanted to continue to make me happy in that role until, and as he said, until either I died or until I retired, whichever came first.
Well, obviously that happened because you went through kind of three companies there as a chief audit executive.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's funny. I remember because, again, I came from that public background and then came into internal audit. So I kind of knew a little bit about internal audit, but it's not one of these professions that little kids, it's like, what do you want to be when you grow up, Steve? And you're like, I want to be an internal auditor. It's like, I want to be a policeman, fireman, lawyer, doctor, right? Nobody goes, I want to be an internal auditor when they're little. And so most of us just kind of end up getting into the profession, like you said, kind of from some different roundabout sort of things, right? You got tapped on the shoulder and said, hey, didn't you do internal audit? Well, would you come back and do it again? So a lot of us kind of end up, here. And I'm sure, a lot of people that are listening might be kind of the same way. They're in internal audit right now, or maybe they want to get into internal audit, right? Because I know there's a lot of people that reach out to me and say, hey, I want to go into internal auditing, but I don't know how to do that. What should I do? Should I get my CAE certification first? And it's like, well, it's kind of chicken and the egg sort of thing, right? Because you got to have some experience. But if you're working on your CIA, that's probably going to help you get into an internal audit role easier because the hiring person knows you're actually serious about it. But you've had lots of people that reported to you over the years. I mean, what kind of would be your suggestion for people maybe that are trying to get into the profession? What are some things maybe that they need to try to do to try to get in? So maybe we can talk about that, and then we'll talk about kind of internal and kind of that upward mobility sort of discussion too.
Sure. Well, you made a lot of great points, Jason, and I always tell people in the Institute of Internal Auditors, I think tries to work on the messaging of what a great career internal auditing is, and for whatever reason, most people when they're in school and they think about accounting degrees, they think that and it's still there. I mean, it's still very prevalent in the schools today. There are rare exceptions out there, but there's plenty of schools that still kind of gear their top accounting students, got business students into a career in public accounting. And I don't dismiss that. I am glad I had my start in public accounting. I learned a lot of great things, a lot of great skill sets that helped me later on in terms of being able to look at a situation and try to go through and analyze something and having exposure to different industries that was very beneficial to me. And of course, then being the chief auditor of a Fortune 200 company like Continental Airlines and a Fortune 100 company like United Airlines, it looked good for them to have a chief audit executive who had started their career in public accounting and had a CPA as well as the CIA and so forth. So again, I would never discourage people from having those kinds of backgrounds, but I would also tell people that today's internal audit world, I think people are looking for a whole different list of skill sets than when I certainly came out, or even 20 years ago. I really do think that there's less emphasis on the financial, statement activities that an internal audit department will have, and think of the things that you would want to see in people now. Technology. I mean, with all of the technology, aspects out there. Anybody who can come in with strong information systems backgrounds, who understands maybe artificial intelligence, who understands robotics, who understands how to make data analytics sing, I think is going to be a big plus for them. I'll be very honest with you. I always would tell people, if I had my choice between somebody who had just absolutely strong people skills and someone who had got the gold medal on the CPA exam or the CIA exam, and there's no disrespect, Richard will probably call me and say, what do you mean? You would take somebody with strong people skills over somebody who got the top award on the CIA? And I go, probably so.
Yeah. Well, he might call me too, because I would say the same thing.
Yeah, and I was the chair of the professional certifications board. So, but I would also tell people that having the certifications is a great way to distinguish yourself in your career.
Oh yeah.
And versus somebody who doesn't, because it shows the discipline to be able to have that experience. But personal skills, interactions, being able to deal with people, actually enjoying working with people, like I said, technology skills and so forth are really things that are critical. And then just the ability. I always tell people, I was born in the state of Missouri, which is a show me state. I always tell people that every auditor should be born in Missouri.
Show me.
Show me. Because so many people, auditors, walk in, talk to their clients or the people that they're auditing, and they accept at face value exactly what they're told. Yeah. And I call it you have to have a great deal of common sense in internal auditing. Sit there. Okay, I hear what you're telling me. I believe what you're telling me is true, but show me what it is that will demonstrate to me that this is really working the way that it is. As I told people in my 25 years as chief auditor, if I wrote audit reports based on what people told us, I would have written 25 audit reports.
Yeah.
I wrote a heck of a lot more than 25 audit reports because my auditors would go in and ask for information, documentation that would tell us what it is that verifies that what they're telling us is really happening the way that it is. And people would sit there and go, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Well, I thought we were doing this reconciliation. I thought we were getting these things billed timely. I thought this person was checking this against this, and nope, I guess they're not doing it.
Yeah.
And so forth. So I think it's some of that, also that critical thinking, common sense. And the things I'm talking about, Jason, are not, CPA type characteristics. Although they are, but they're not somebody who just gone through a business school type of skill sets. I really do think today that internal audit can have a whole host of people working for them from all sorts of disciplines. And then it gets back to what kind of, I always would tell people, what kind of team do you want to have? Do you want to have a team that looks like and sounds like Steve Goepfert? Or do you want to have a diverse team? And I was a big believer that you want the most diverse team that you can have, because there's no way one person can think of all the possibilities as they're delving into an area, and having all of that feedback and input bubbling up to the surface is really where you take an internal audit department and move it from a good audit department into what I call the world-class internal audit department that I think some of us really wanted to create. And we knew when we got there what it looked like and what it felt like, and the enthusiasm that you had when you had a department that just had all these top performers who were coming up with great ideas in creating, as I called it, the moment of head snap, when you walk in to tell the CEO and the CFO that here's what internal audit found, and you see their head snap, and it's like, wow, how did internal audit come up with that? And that's what you live for. I mean, you live for that moment where your executive management and your board is sitting there going, wow, that's incredible. That's great information. We didn't know that. All the other people in this company, we didn't know that was happening.
Well, and I think that's why it's important. Like you said, the more diverse your team is, the more you're able to kind of see this, because you get rid of some of the groupthink that's there. You're able to process things differently, see things from a different standpoint. and there's been lots of research done, right, that the excuse me, the more diverse your team is, the more effective it is. It may not be more efficient, but it's going to be more effective in the end.
Well, it is. And, and again, the chief auditor's role is to try to help orchestrate that. Mm-hmm. You've got these people that you're out there running, full force, going after, challenging something, going after something. And your job is kind of like an orchestra, like a conductor of an orchestra. You're out there trying to, pull people in, keep them from bumping into walls, bring them back into this thing, help them, guide them down another path, challenge them and so forth. But again, if you want internal audit today, we always talk about providing value add to our organizations. Well, there's only one way you can do that, and that's really digging in, understanding how your organization operates, and having the creative people on your team that are able to walk in there and deliver those kinds of results to your company.
Mm-hmm. And focusing on what they actually want, right? Because I think sometimes that's where we can get so technical as a profession about, I've got to do A, B, C, D, or whatever, and I need to perform these kind of audits every year. And it's like, time out, guys. Think about who you're actually working for. Figure out what's really important to them. That's where you should be focusing your effort if you really want to provide value.
Yeah, that was one of the beauties of me leaving internal audit for a while, because in my role in financial planning, I literally was in a special projects group, and my sole task was to walk into various departments, figure out what they were doing, and was there ways to improve, the efficiencies with which they did things. Was there money being left on the table? Was there money being spent that didn't need to be spent? Was there ways that we could improve cash flow, and was successful at it? And then when they said, my CFO said, well, didn't you be in internal audit? And then his other comment to me was, well, you can just do that same stuff that you were doing before and just do it over an internal audit.
Yeah.
And you'll have more people to do it. Of course, I had more people to do it with.
Right.
And really took that kind of a thought process to the internal audit world about how do we go in and make impact to the organizations that we're at. I had this presentation I made last week to one of the chapters, and it was about value-added auditing, and told my example of going to a place like Eastern Airlines that literally was on death's door when I went there. And one of the first audits that we decided to do was we thought that we weren't getting all of the cash proceeds off of our aircraft. And so we, way back in the 1980s, went in and did some data analysis and realized we had one flight attendant we called Mr. Zero and one flight attendant we called Miss Zero, because no matter what flights they were on, they never had any sales on the aircraft. Even when they were flying from New York City to Las Vegas on Friday evening.
Nobody's going to be drinking, right?
Nobody's drinking alcohol. And so we put auditors on the planes and observed them collecting the funds and then not depositing the funds, and then able to get those people out of our company. Mm-hmm. And the next month they're sitting, I still remember my CFO went into their senior management board in the boardroom, and all the revenue numbers were going down except one. Liquor revenues had gone up over $200,000 in a single month.
Oh.
And the CEO were sitting there going, what happened with liquor? And fortunately, my boss had listened. He said, well, the auditors have been out there, doing these audits and catching these people not turning in monies. And clearly the result is people are throwing money into the till like they'd never done before.
Yep.
And suddenly we had made a huge impact just by doing one simple process, which to us was almost a no-brainer. Mm-hmm. Because we knew if we went out there and kind of prodded the system, that people would do the right things. And that's really what we ultimately wanted to do, was encourage people to do the right thing and turn in the proceeds, and the company would benefit from it.
Well, yeah, I mean, just that one audit, that's $2.5 million in revenue a year.
That's
right? I mean,
that's right.
That's a big impact.
And that's really the kinds of things that we tried to do in my functions were the kinds of things that would really add true impact to the bottom line of the organization. Of course, it paid benefits because if you do those kind of things and times get tough, and in the airline industry, there was 9/11, there were the recessions and so forth. And when they come to internal audit and ask you to take head counts, it's like, well, why do you want to do that when our department pays back more than 5, 6, 7, 8 times its budget? What's the value in doing that?
Yeah. Well, and that probably helped you then too. I guess when they would come to you and want headcount reductions, right, having that justification actually helped probably. So you didn't have to reduce your staff maybe as much as some of the other areas did, right?
Yeah. Well, we had a good argument, and of course, and I also learned to make sure that we put together, we called it an audit accomplishments list, and we literally quantified the dollar savings, the dollar opportunities the department had identified. Yeah. And shared that with executive management and with the audit committee so that they knew here are the things that we can demonstrate that we bring in terms of value, so that you don't have to think about an audit that you did. You actually have it there in black and white in front of you so that you can see that, hey, Internal has done this for you, by the way. And so we do add value to the process.
Well, that's one of those big things. If there's chief audit executives listening that are not doing that, they need to start doing that. Because I used to do that too, right? Because again, they would come back and try to justify, and it's like, well, I just saved you 10% on our external audit. That's X amount of dollars, right? Sure. And so actually having some of that stuff in black and white can actually help and really show that you are actually adding the value. So
it does. And, but auditors, internal auditors, we're humble people. we really we don't like to, to blow our own trumpets. But in fact, if I used to sit in my boss's, staff meeting, it was finance, he was the CFO, and sitting in him, and you'd listen to the treasurer talking about these great deals that they had cut. You'd listen to the head of accounting talk about all the savings that he was generating in this area. You just go down the list of people who are talking about the great things they were doing, and internal audit kind of sits there and says, well, we completed 92% of our audit plan this year, and so we think we've been under budget, and so we think we've been successful. And you have to think about also what other people are talking about, and getting into the mindset of your leaders where you are adding value. Plus, when you quantify it, as you know, Jason, when you quantify it, your people think about, gee, we're not, we haven't got this process done. We're not billing these transactions out in a timely fashion. And that's great to say, but if you can put a dollar value with it, it's even better. And then we'll generate the interest of upper management to fix the situations that you're finding in internal audit. So that's that's always a positive.
Well, and it's funny because when you said that, it reminded me very early in my career, I was still in public accounting, and one of the senior partners that I was working with, there was one time that there was, I won't get into the whole story, but anyway, the lesson I learned was, he said, Jason, if you're not willing to toot your own horn, nobody else is going to. And so I think, you bring up a valid point that I think sometimes auditors, we don't want to toot our own horn. And the problem is if everybody around you is blowing their horn and you're not, right, what's everybody going to think? And even though we may be providing value, if you're not quantifying it, if you're not sharing it with other people, they don't know. And I think that may be actually one of the causes why internal audit tends to get hit so hard a lot of times, because the other executives don't realize the value we're providing because we're not sharing it with everybody else.
That's absolutely right, Jason. Again, I think all auditors, but chief auditors especially, have to take that step back. We get you'd made a perfect comment earlier about we get so ingrained into the mechanics of what we do in running an internal audit department. The plan, the schedule, how we're doing on the budget, and all these things, and they're important. Don't get me wrong. You can't ignore those mechanics. But for years I was like the chief auditor. I was not a chief audit executive. And then one
You're a
day
chief.
the IIA woke up and said, we're chief audit executives. And I really saw that was the case when 9/11 came along and the corporate governance scandals occurred. And now audit committees are, we went, listen, audit committees went from being like a perfunctory 1 hour kind of a meeting to being 2 hours, 2.5 hours, 3 hours or more.
Yeah.
Because there were so many critical items that the audit committee had, and it upgraded its view of the world. The board upgraded its view of the audit committee. And here we are as chief auditors. And now all of a sudden we've got, I had at United, I had 6 audit committee members sitting across from me, some pretty heavy hitting people.
Mm-hmm.
And they're expecting me. They got the CFO in the room. They have the chief accounting officer in the room. They have the senior vice president and treasurer in the room. And here's the chief auditor in the room. And so you have to be something that you want all those eyes and all those people to listen to what you have to say. You want their heads to snap when you say something to them. And you have to, but you have to have something of value to tell them so that they want to continue to listen to you and what you bring to the table. And so I really do think that we have to take that step back and think about what would an executive want to deliver to both their senior managements and to the board, that will tell them that, hey, I deserve that seat at the table, just like everybody else does in the room.
Well, I think that's interesting because I hadn't thought of it that way with the CA versus CAE, but I talk to a lot of people and they'll express frustration, right? Like, I'm not being invited to the big person table, right? Kind of deal. And or I had one guy that I remember, he said, I want internal audit to be a varsity sport in my organization. So I said, well, are you acting like a varsity player? And he goes, I'm like, well, okay, you're probably not. So if you're not, then of course everybody else isn't going to see you that way. And like you said, I mean, your experience sitting across the table from the audit committee members, all the other people in the room are executives. It's like, Steve, it's time you got to step up, man. You got to actually have that executive presence and act like an executive if you want to get treated like an executive.
Absolutely. Perfect example, is I always try to tell people, you can sit there in an audit committee meeting. You've got, in my case, I had 6 people sitting across from me who are my audit committee members. And you've got this wonderful finding. And so you read the finding to them. It was we found this amount of money. It was, it totaled $1 million. If you give a presentation to people, even like that, to your audit committee, they're going to lose interest, even if it's something important, even if it's something you should pay attention. And I always tell people, watch what your top executives do when they're in a room of their peers and when they're in the room talking to the board. They look them straight in the eye. They have something of value to tell them. They are forceful in the way they go about doing it. And part of being successful in that role as a chief auditor is, again, being that person, as you said, who has that executive presence that will cause people to want to sit there and pay attention to what you have. And of course, then you have to have done your work.
You better have some substance behind it.
You had
right?
to have some substance, but also being able to understand what that substance is.
Yeah.
Because if you go and share things with people that really aren't important, they sit there and scratch their head and go, I wonder why they don't realize that this is really not all that exciting, versus something that just, like I said, when I also told the story about, going down the elevator with my CEO one night when, after work, and as we're walking out of the elevator, starts, asking about a few things, and I start telling him about a couple of audits we're doing. So we're walking out of the building, and then he starts heading for his place that he's walking to, and I'm walking center in the same direction. We keep walking. I get to the corner where I need to turn off to go to my place, I know he's got to go up another block or two before he goes over. I could tell he was still interested in what I was talking about. So I just continued to walk with him.
Yep.
I thought I was actually going to have to end up going into the lobby of the place where he lived because he was so enthralled with it. But that's what you want to do.
Yeah.
You want to, you know, people talk about the elevator talk. You have to have things that in the first few minutes catches people's attention to the point that they keep asking you for more information. They want to know about this. They want to know about that. If you've done that, then you're probably going to be fairly successful at what you're doing. If not, then it's gonna be okay. I guess audit committee meetings coming up.
Yeah.
I guess I need to find out what audit's been doing. Okay, that looks okay, but you're not really going to be somebody that they want to have come into the room and be at their table to help them.
Well, and I think that's a great example of, you know, what you just shared of knowing whether or not you're adding value to. Because if the CEO wants to keep talking to you, and like you said, you know, he could have stopped and said, "Hey, Steve, come up for a drink. I want to keep talking."
Yep.
You know, he might have said that. And so by having him want to talk to you about that, it shows that you're actually adding the value, you're being relevant, you're being an executive, you're really at a trusted advisor level at that point.
Right.
You know, what you said before, you know, is if we kind of go in, we put some stuff out there and everybody kind of scratches their head, like, why do they think this is important?
Mm-hmm.
The hard part with that is when they're scratching their head saying, you know, this isn't really important. Why are they telling me this? The next thought that probably pops in their mind is, why do we even have this person working for us? Right. And that's where, again, I think that, you know, when people have trouble, I mean, there's a lot of audit shops that have trouble getting budget, you know, and again, if you're having trouble getting budget, is it because maybe they don't view that what you're spending on already is valuable? You're just a necessary evil that we have to have. And so we're going to spend as little money as we can, or, you know, like you said, in your departments, you guys were, you were contributing back in value 5-10 times more what your budget was. So that those are completely different conversations when you have those budget kind of conversations. So, well, hey, time goes by quick when we start talking, which I love. But I guess, but before we cut off too, I wanted to just touch a little bit on what it's like to be a CAE. I mean, we gave a little glimpse of that in kind of your discussion of sitting across the table from your audit committee. But I know there's a lot of people in audit that you kind of have in your mind, you know, I'm going to come into internal audit, I'm going to be a senior after 2 or 3 years, and I'm going to be a senior for a few years, and I'm going to be a manager, then I'm going to be a and then I'm going to be a chief audit executive. And the reality is, I mean, it's essentially still a pyramid. There's only one chief audit executive for each organization. So what does it actually take to kind of get to that level? And what does the job actually entail? Because I think what happens often is people get promoted because they think that's just the next step. And they get to that step and they look around and they're like, geez, I'm not really happy. I would have been better to stay at the role lower because I really don't like what I'm doing now. So I want to kind of give people a little flavor of that too, so that, and it's okay to stop. Everybody doesn't have to be a chief audit executive. It's fine to stop at the manager or director level if that's what it is. So maybe kind of help people, you know what does it take to get to be a chief audit executive, and kind of what does the job actually entail?
Sure. Well, those are great questions. And, you know, the first thing I would tell everybody is your career is a journey. And when you take that journey, you're looking for the things that make you excited to get up in the morning and go to your place of work. And ultimately I realized after a number of years, the thing that got me the most excited to get up in the morning was I loved internal auditing. I loved what we did in internal audit, and I loved the people I worked with in internal audit, and I loved the people in my department and the company in internal audit. But not everybody will feel that way. And that's part of what your life journey is. And that's why I would tell people who came into internal audit and worked for me after a while, they were starting to lack enthusiasm. Well, let's figure out what it is that we can help you get to that is going to make you excited about coming to work, because that's where you need to be. You absolutely in it, and not everybody needs to be an internal audit. They need to find that thing that's going to make them happy. And then, hey, but if they were an internal audit and they enjoyed internal audit and they go out into another department and they find, wow, that's what I really love to do, they're still going to have awfully positive feelings about that internal audit role because they didn't force it down my throat. They were great people to work with, and these people will have learned things about the value of internal controls, the value of, of having good accountability and so forth. And so they'll be great representatives for internal audit when they move out into the organization. I would tell people though that, when you're looking at the career, the first thing you want to do is find that thing that you really enjoy. I would listen to my people talk about, when they get to Friday, oh, thank God it's Friday, and we get the weekend off. And I appreciate that. I understood that too. Hey, I like the weekends also. But, then I come in the office on Monday and I go, wow, it's great. It's Monday. And they'd look at me and look, what? We got 5 more days.
What do you mean? Yeah, until the weekend.
Till the weekend. And it's like, no, I'm excited. And they go, and when somebody's been doing it for as long as I was doing it, that was the one thing no one could ever doubt was, you really do like this stuff called internal auditing, don't you? And I love it. Absolutely love it. And although I do love retirement now too, so I have to be full disclosure. It's a great thing to do. But I think to be an internal audit though, and to be a chief auditor, you got to love the job. You have to be passionate about what you're doing. You need to, I think a chief auditor, one of the things that's critical for a chief auditor to have, and I think all internal auditors, but chief auditor, is I call it unwavering ethical compass. And that means your compass can't be running all over the board when it comes to ethics. You absolutely have to know where the ethical, where the white is and where the black is. And you have to be able to discern that and discern it very clearly in your organization. I think with that, you have to have courage.
Yeah. Well, that's where I was going to kind of go with that, is because, what a lot of times what it means is you have to have the courage to do what is right.
Right.
And to stand up when you have to stand up. And sometimes it means we die on the hill, right? I mean, to kind of use that example, because sometimes people have to choose to do that depending on what it is. But yeah, because it does take a lot of courage. You gotta have courage as a CAE.
You're going to walk in. Internal auditors and chief auditors, I always say, have to report the facts. We don't have an option. Everybody else in the organization has an option. Internal audit doesn't have an option. We have to report the facts. That doesn't mean that your leadership in your company is going to like those facts. In fact, they might dislike it tremendously that internal audit is coming in and reporting those specific facts, because maybe they've gone out and told, who knows, the board, other stakeholders, here's the facts. And internal audit's coming in and saying, no, these are the facts. Maybe you're going to tell them facts about people that they have very high opinions about. And guess what? Here's the facts. And that takes courage. It takes courage, because a lot of people in organizations will sit there and do what I call the bobbing heads. They will nod their heads to the most highest person, what they're saying, and go, yep, that's the way it is. Internal audit doesn't have that option. Internal audit will bob their head up and down when there's a reason to, and when there's not, you have to turn it from side to side and tell people, nope, it's not that way. It's this way. And that takes a lot of courage, because the people you may be reporting on may be very senior in your company, and you still have to go in there and report the facts. So I think you have to have a lot of courage in that role. And if you're not, then you need to get out of that role very quickly. because the company needs somebody who is going to be that person who is going to report the facts, no matter what they are, and report them all the way up the food chain, up to including to the audit committee of the board of directors. Because when they don't, that's when organizations can run the risk of being in a very, very difficult situation, and you don't want to be part of an organization that's like that.
Right.
And but if internal audit doesn't do it, I always would tell my staff, if internal audit's not going to look at this matter, who else will?
Yeah, and that's why a lot of times we end up getting some of those politically sensitive kind of things to deal with. But that's the role, and there's the reason, usually why most people have that dual reporting relationship,
right,
to help make sure that we actually can.
Well, you absolutely are in the right position as the chief auditor, because in our company, when we had investigations of department heads, other executives and so forth, internal audit in our companies did that primarily because of our reporting relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Because if things got off the rails and upper management wasn't going to do something about it, you still had that direct avenue to the audit committee to be able to report what was happening. Plus, we were very objective. As I said, internal audit doesn't have vested interests. We're just trying to ferret out the facts. And so, we're not coming in after somebody for vengeance or anything else. And, but you have a role to do, and so you're going to do it.
Yep. Well, it's a tough job, but somebody's got to do it, right?
That's right.
You did it for 25 years and loved every minute of it.
Right. No, it was a lot of fun.
No, well, hey, Steve, I really appreciate you talking
Sure.
with me, because I think, again, there's a lot of really good information that kind of came out of this, for people, again, whether they're kind of moving up the chain and trying to figure out, do I want to be a chief audit executive? And it's okay to not want that, because there's a lot of courage, there's a lot of politicking, there's a lot of other things that go along with the job. We were talking before we started recording that a lot of times people see the good things, they don't see what goes on behind the closed doors, right? Or what I used to say sometimes is like, things kind of come down and they end up resting on your shoulder, and you can't let everybody below you know about it, or trying to protect them from it. And so a lot of times the pressure that the CAE feels, others around them in the department would have no idea.
Well, and if you're a good chief auditor, you want your people to work without feeling like they're constrained. You want them to be, as I like to say, soaring with the eagles. Mm-hmm. You don't want them to be tied down. You want them to be out there enthusiastic. You want them to be motivated, and so forth. There are a number of things, as we all know, in organizations where there are plenty of politics, and the chief auditor is no exception of having to, deal with other department heads, deal with their superiors in the organization, deal with the board, and so forth. Many pressures put back down on them. And what you want to try to do is filter through that, tell people what they need to do their jobs, but try not to let it bear them down. And, and I think, but that's part of leadership.
Yeah.
Leaders, it's hard to motivate people if all you're doing is giving them doom and gloom. I served in, airlines. I went through my career 3 bankruptcies.
Yeah.
And, and went through 4 mergers. And, when you go through those kinds of situations, certainly in bankruptcies, it's hard to keep people motivated to want to come to work and do the right kinds of things. But you have to, as a leader, you can either put up the white flag and surrender, or you can get in there every single day and do the good fight. And I think part of, again, one of the reasons that I was successful in my career was work through all those things.
Yeah.
Continue to produce results even in the darkest of times and even in the most trying circumstances, and kept my people, highly motivated because of the things we were able to accomplish to help our company continue to exist, continue to succeed. And part of that is, again, I call it the positive attitude. so many people come into the workplace who just, the glass is half empty. Well, I understand that too. I'm an accountant, an auditor. Glass is half empty at times, but it's also half full.
Yeah.
And taking that positive attitude and making things happen, taking things when they're tough and succeeding, I think is something that also separates people in their careers. It's easy to succeed when things are really, really good. It's hard to succeed when things aren't as good. Yeah. And people who can help you succeed when times are not good are ones you definitely want to have around as things start picking up.
Yeah. Well, no, and I think it's, to kind of use one of the phrases you just used there, I think, Steve, you're one of those people that has fought a good fight your whole career. You've gone through, like you said, what was it, three bankruptcies, 4 mergers or something like that, right? And you've had a lot of people that have worked for you over the years, and you've really helped develop and grow the practice of internal auditing. So really, again, kind of honored to have you on here with me and to be able to talk and hear your wisdom again. And hopefully, again, that people that are listening, that'll continue on and you'll continue to keep impacting the profession and people's personal lives as we go forward.
Thank you, Jason. And again, I commend you as well, because you are fighting the good fight. You go out and do a lot of this great training and again, trying to help people do the right things and understand the value of what we do as internal auditing. And you should be commended as well for helping move things in a positive direction.
Well, thank you, Steve. I'm glad you think I'm doing it. I know sometimes I think people just think I'm crazy, but anyway, it doesn't matter.
Well, it helps to be a little warped to be in internal auditing too, especially sense of humor. So.
I've got the warped side can come out too. Yeah. I just try to hold that back because sometimes it freaks people out. No. So, all right. Well, hey, thanks again, Steve. And so for everybody listening, it's kind of a wrap for today, but we'll catch you on a future episode of Jamming with Jason. See ya. And that's a wrap. Thanks for listening to today's episode of Jamming with Jason. Keep on rocking in the audit world. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll catch you later on the next show. If you'd like to earn continuing professional education for listening to today's episode, head on over to C Risk Academy at ondemand.criskacademy.com. And that's C as in the letter C, riskacademy.com. Not only do you get a CPE certificate, but you also will have access to the video version of today's show. The views and opinions expressed on this show are that of the individuals and not of their respective organizations.